Lisa Bonet and Jason Momoa are officially divorced. The couple had already been separated for years, but today the marriage of more than 7 years officially came to an end. Bonet filed for divorce in January and went as quickly as legally possible without dispute.
He was the man who publicly called her the love of his life, the woman he had worshipped since childhood. She was the free spirit who made the world believe in fairy tales all over again.
Ever since I was like 8 years old and I saw her on the TV, and I was like, Mommy, I want that one. I'm like, I'm gonna stalk you for the rest of my life and I'm gonna get you. I didn't tell her that.
Together, Jason Momoa and Lisa Bonet looked like proof that real love could exist in Hollywood. But here's the thing nobody tells you. When the dust settled and the paperwork was filed, the real story that emerged was nothing like the one they'd been selling. And what Lisa Bonet revealed, not through explosive headlines, but through court documents, carefully chosen words, and a quiet devastation, said everything that Jason Momoa never wanted the world to know. The date nobody wanted you to notice. Most people remember January 2022. That's when Jason Momoa and Lisa Bonet put out that poetic joint statement about revolutions unfolding and seismic shifts and love evolving. It was beautifully worded, soft, non-accusatory. It made them both look graceful. The world mourned the split, but respected how they handled it. Then, January 2024 arrived, and Lisa Bonet filed the official divorce papers, and buried inside those documents was a detail that quietly blew apart everything they had said publicly 2 years earlier. She listed their official date of separation as October 7th, 2020. Not 2022. 2020. That single date told the whole story. When they stood before the world releasing that joint statement in early 2022 about parting ways with love and dignity, they had already been living as separated people for over a year. The marriage, for all practical purposes, had been dead before they ever made the announcement. That gap, the 14-plus months between when it actually ended and when they told the world, is where everything gets interesting. October 7th, 2020 was also the exact date of their third wedding anniversary. Their marriage ended on the same day it was supposed to be celebrated. That is not a coincidence you forget. That is a detail that suggests the kind of quiet, resolved, devastating conversation that happens when two people finally stop pretending. The divorce itself moved remarkably fast. Bonet filed on January 8, 2024. By January 9th, one single day later, the Los Angeles County Court had already granted the petition. One day. That only happens when everything has already been settled long before any papers hit a courthouse desk. The asset division, the custody arrangement, the financial terms, it was all worked out in advance. The filing was just the final formality, the last official act of ending something that had already been over for years. The divorce became legally final on July 9, 2024. So when Lisa Bonet filed those papers, she wasn't starting a process. She was closing a door that had been shut for 3.5 years. And the longer you sit with that, the more questions it raises about what exactly was happening inside that household during the years they kept showing up to red carpets together. She was Denise Huxtable before she was anyone's wife. To understand what Lisa Bonet was bringing into this marriage, you have to go back to a girl who didn't quite belong anywhere. She was born Lisa Michelle Bonet on November 16, 1967, in San Francisco, California, to an African-American opera singer father named Alan and a Jewish schoolteacher mother named Arlene. Her parents separated when she was still a baby, and from that point forward, She was raised entirely by her mother in middle-class Reseda in the San Fernando Valley. She never really knew her father. That wound of an absent father who disappeared before she could understand what she had lost would quietly shape every major relationship she would have for the rest of her life. Growing up mixed race in the 1970s and early 80s came with its own particular brand of loneliness. She once described her school years by saying the black kids called her an Oreo, and the white kids didn't talk to her at all. She sat in the middle, belonging nowhere, invisible to both sides. The social isolation was real and persistent, and it pushed her inward in ways that made her intensely self-sufficient, deeply private, and fiercely protective of her own sense of identity. Acting became her escape. She began appearing in small television roles as a teenager, and at just 16 years old, she walked into the audition that would change her life. Bill Cosby himself reportedly looked at her braces during the audition and said he loved them. She got the role of Denise Huxtable on The Cosby Show, and almost overnight, a shy, biracial kid from Reseda became one of the most recognizable young faces on American television. But Lisa Bonet was never entirely comfortable being what the show needed her to be. She was curious, rebellious, and increasingly hungry for roles that stretched beyond the wholesome confines of network family television. In 1987, the same year she launched the Cosby spin-off A Different World, she took a role in the psychological horror film Angel Heart opposite Mickey Rourke, an explicit, dark, provocative film that was almost the polar opposite of Denise Huxtable. She also appeared topless in Interview magazine. Bill Cosby reportedly was not pleased. Their relationship, always somewhat tense behind the scenes, deteriorated significantly. That same year, on her 20th birthday, she eloped with rock musician Lenny Kravitz in Las Vegas. She was pregnant not long after, and when she disclosed her pregnancy while filming A Different World, Cosby, according to Lenny Kravitz's own memoir, told her point-blank that Denise Huxtable was not pregnant. He later had her pushed off the spin-off. She returned to The Cosby Show for a time, but by April 1991, she was fired, with the official explanation listing creative differences. She was 23 years old, newly divorced from Kravitz by 1993, a single mother to a daughter named Zoe, and essentially out of the television career that had made her famous. The years that followed were quiet by Hollywood standards. Occasional film roles in Enemy of the State, High Fidelity, Biker Boys, but nothing that recaptured the national spotlight. She stepped back, recalibrated, and began living life on her own terms, even going so far as to legally change her name to Lila Coy Moon in 1993, though she continued using Lisa Bonet professionally. By the time she walked into that Los Angeles jazz club in 2005, Lisa Bonet had already lived more than most people do in a lifetime. She had been famous, sidelined, married, divorced, a mother, and fired. She was 37 years old, and she had learned hard that the world will try to define you if you don't define yourself first. That self-possession was both her strength and, as it turned out, one of the core tensions that would eventually end her second marriage. The man who had been watching her since he was 8 years old. Jason Momoa's story begins on the other side of a very wide cultural gulf. He was born Joseph Jason Namakeha Momoa on August 1, 1979, in Honolulu, Hawaii, to a native Hawaiian painter named Joseph and a photographer mother named Connie. He was an only child. When he was just 6 months old, his parents divorced, and his mother moved with him to Norwalk, Iowa, a small Midwestern town about as far from the beach as you can get. His father remained in Hawaii, and Jason spent summers there, which meant his childhood was spent between two very different worlds: the flat, landlocked plains of Iowa and the volcanic, ocean-surrounded landscape of the Hawaiian Islands. Neither one fully claimed him. Growing up in Iowa as a kid who looked the way Jason Momoa looked was not easy. He was physically striking, racially ambiguous, interested in art and skateboarding, none of which exactly made him blend into a small Midwestern town. He has spoken about being bullied and struggling to fit in during those years, describing himself as a product of two very opposite worlds who couldn't find solid ground in either. After graduating high school, he moved back to Hawaii and enrolled at the University of Hawaii with an interest in marine biology. But fate intervened in the form of a Japanese fashion designer named Takeo Kobayashi, who spotted the young Momoa and encouraged him to pursue modeling. By 1999, at just 19 years old, Momoa had won the title of Hawaii's Model of the Year and was walking runways. He knew nothing about acting but auditioned for a role on Baywatch Hawaii anyway, and against roughly 1,300 other hopefuls, he landed it. He later admitted he didn't even know how to act at the time. Baywatch Hawaii made his face recognizable, but didn't exactly make him a star. After it ended, he spent years grinding through secondary television roles, North Shore, Stargate, Atlantis, building a reputation as a physically commanding presence without quite breaking through. In 2008, at a bar in Hollywood, a man slashed him across the face with a broken beer glass. The wound required approximately 140 stitches and reconstructive surgery. The scar it left through his left eyebrow became, over time, one of his most distinctive physical features. Then came Game of Thrones. In 2011, Momoa appeared as Khal Drogo, the fierce, nearly wordless Dothraki leader who commands through physical presence and a kind of raw animal authority. He had auditioned for the role by performing a traditional Maori haka, a war dance, and the showrunners were apparently stunned. The role made him globally famous almost overnight. But there was a cruel twist. Khal Drogo dies at the end of the first season, and when the show went on to become one of the most talked-about television events in history, Momoa wasn't in it anymore. He later admitted to feeling the financial pressure of that exit acutely. He described the period after Game of Thrones as one where he was completely in debt and struggling to find work, calling it especially hard because he had children to support. The comeback, when it came, was enormous. He was cast as Aquaman in the DC Extended Universe, appearing first in 2016's Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice, and then headlining the solo Aquaman film in 2018, which made over $1.1 billion globally. He was reportedly paid $7 million for the first Aquaman and $15 million for the 2023 sequel. The man who once couldn't get an agent after Baywatch was now one of the highest-paid actors in Hollywood. But here's what makes all of this relevant to what came later. Jason Momoa had been watching Lisa Bonet since he was a child. He has said, publicly and more than once, that she was his childhood crush, that he saw her on The Cosby Show and, in his own words, told his mother he wanted her. He admitted he didn't reveal this to her until after they already had children together, describing himself, only half-jokingly, as a stalker. The point is that before they ever met at that jazz club in 2005, Jason Momoa had a version of Lisa Bonet built up in his mind for decades. He was 25 years old when they finally met. She was 37. He was a young man still finding himself. She was a woman who had already survived more than most people could imagine. That age gap, 12 years, would matter far more in the end than anyone publicly acknowledged at the beginning. What the fairy tale was actually built on. When Jason Momoa and Lisa Bonet showed up together publicly in 2005, the story the world told itself was simple and romantic. Childhood crush gets his dream girl. Free-spirited actress finds a man who adores her completely. Two people who had both known hardship finding refuge in each other. And there was real truth to that. By every account, their early connection was genuine and intense. She once said of the moment they met, "Love came, and it came big." He was so openly devoted to her that it read as almost theatrical in its sincerity. The way he spoke about her in interviews, the way he credited her with making him believe anything was possible, the way he would tear up while referencing her in award speeches. For the first several years, everything about them appeared to confirm the fairy tale. They had 2 children together before they ever officially married. Their daughter, Lola Yolani, arrived in July 2007, and their son, Nakoa Wolf Manakawapo Namakeha, followed in December 2008. For nearly 9 years, they lived together, raised children together, built a family together, without ever legally marrying. They spoke of each other as husband and wife, long before any official ceremony. When they finally did get married, it was in October 2017, in a private ceremony held in Topanga Canyon, a quiet, intentional event that matched the kind of life they appeared to be building. What made their family genuinely unusual by Hollywood standards was the warmth of their blended arrangement. Momoa embraced Zoe Kravitz, Bonet's daughter from her marriage to Lenny Kravitz, as a true stepdaughter. And somehow, remarkably, Momoa and Kravitz themselves became close friends. In 2018, Vanity Fair ran a piece praising this unlikely arrangement, calling it a masterclass in the modern divorce. Lenny Kravitz referred to Momoa publicly as a ride or die. Momoa attended Zoe's premiere for The Batman in 2022. By all outward appearances, these were 3 adults doing something genuinely thoughtful for the children in their care. But underneath that surface warmth, something more complicated was taking shape. Sources close to the couple described them in terms that made the incompatibility sound almost structurally inevitable. He was jovial, loud, and the center of attention. She was cool, calm, and subdued. He craved adventure, travel, new locations, the adrenaline of a life constantly in motion. She preferred the quiet of Los Angeles, reading, writing, cooking, wellness routines, and rooted domestic stability. In the early years, those differences created a magnetic tension that worked. He brought energy and spontaneity into her world. She brought groundedness and focus into his. The problem was that these weren't just personality quirks. They were fundamentally different visions of what a life should look like. As Momoa's career began its ascent, from Aquaman to Dune to the Fast and Furious franchise, the gulf between those visions grew wider and wider. He was being pulled across the globe by a career that was finally, after years of grinding, rewarding him at the highest level. She had no interest in following him from one film set to the next. One insider framed it plainly. For some couples, the distance strengthens the marriage. For Lisa and Jason, being apart was a disaster. The pandemic forced the issue in ways that neither of them could avoid. When production shut down globally in 2020, and suddenly the world went still, Jason Momoa was home. Really home. Not just visiting between shoots. He spoke warmly about the period in the early months, calling it a beautiful time to be home with his children. But the same forced proximity that he described initially as a gift appears to have revealed to both of them, in an unavoidable and unambiguous way, just how wide the gap between them had become. The divergences they had managed across years of distance and motion were suddenly right there in the same house, every single day, impossible to ignore. Their official date of separation, October 7th, 2020, falls just months into that pandemic lockdown. Whatever conversation happened on their wedding anniversary that year, it was apparently decisive. Within weeks or months of the world reopening, Jason Momoa was spotted without his wedding ring. The couple said nothing publicly for well over a year after that. The part of the joint statement was designed to hide. When Jason Momoa and Lisa Bonet finally made their separation public in January 2022, the statement they released was a small work of careful crafting. It referenced seismic shifts and transformational times. It talked about love evolving and freeing each other. It named their devotion to their children as unwavering. It was spiritual, measured, and it left almost no room for blame to land anywhere specific. But here's what the statement was designed to do. It was designed to make it look like the separation was happening in real time, something they were navigating together in the present moment. The actual story, as Lisa Bonet's divorce filing would later confirm, was that the decision had been made over a year before they said a single word publicly. They had been living separately, processing separately, building separate futures, and presenting an intact marriage to the world. The question that matters is why. Why maintain the appearance for so long? Part of the answer is privacy. Both of them had expressed repeatedly that their family life was something they wanted to protect from public consumption. Part of it is probably the logistics of two lives deeply intertwined. Children, properties, finances, the blended family relationships with Lenny Kravitz and Zoe. Unraveling all of that quietly takes time. But there's another layer, and it has everything to do with the power dynamic within this relationship. Lisa Bonet spent years as the stabilizing force, the one who held the domestic architecture together while Jason Momoa's career moved at whatever speed it needed to move. She bore the full weight of daily parenting because, as one source noted, they did not use nannies or outside help. She was the one who stayed. She was the one who read, wrote, cooked, kept the household functioning, and apparently grew increasingly weary of doing so alone. When Momoa's career exploded, really exploded, into the kind of global stardom that brings with it an entirely different set of pressures, temptations, and lifestyle demands, the gap between who he was becoming and what she needed from a partner became impossible to bridge. He wanted to keep working as much as he possibly could. She had no interest in relocating her life to follow him to every film location. Those two facts alone, sitting alongside each other, describe a marriage that had already run its course. What Bonet's divorce filing did, in its quiet and deliberate way, was establish a clear record of facts. She listed the real separation date. She asked for joint physical and legal custody of their children. She waived spousal support. She confirmed that assets had already been divided by mutual agreement before any papers were filed. There was no drama, no accusation, no attempt to wound him publicly. But the documents told the truth that the joint statement had avoided. This marriage ended in 2020, not 2022, and it ended without fanfare on the anniversary of the day it began. Insiders who spoke to various outlets in the aftermath described Bonet as someone who had reached a point of settled clarity. She had spent enough of her life being the anchor for someone else. She had grown up without a father, been fired by a man who wanted to control her image, built a career on her own terms, survived the end of one marriage, raised a daughter largely alone, and then spent years being the emotional and domestic fulcrum of a household whose center of gravity kept flying away on film shoots. By 2020, she had done the math, and the answer she arrived at was that she could not save both the marriage and herself. What made that conclusion particularly striking is this: she had said something similar in public, in plain sight, weeks before the world found out the marriage was over. In December 2021, while still technically presenting as a couple with Momoa, she sat down for an interview with longtime friend Marisa Tomei for Interview magazine and spoke about learning to be authentically herself, following an invitation from the universe to step into a river of uncertainty. She talked about eliminating extra noise and growing roots deeper into her own values. At the time, outlets read it as general reflection. In hindsight, it reads as a woman describing exactly where she already was, on the other side of a decision she had already made. The interview was published 1 month before the joint statement went live. She had already let go. She was simply waiting for the right moment to tell the world what came after and what it all revealed. Once the divorce became public, the contrast between how Lisa Bonet and Jason Momoa moved through the aftermath said more about the marriage than most of the official statements ever did. Momoa moved fast and loudly. Within months of the January 2022 separation announcement, he was photographed at the premiere of The Batman, at which his stepdaughter Zoe Kravitz starred, wearing no wedding ring and accompanied by their 2 children. He told an interviewer on the red carpet that Lisa couldn't be there and that it was still family. He made it sound easy, warm, uncomplicated. In the summer of 2022, he was linked to actress Isa Gonzalez. That didn't last long. He then appeared to be dating quietly, and by May 2024, just 4 months after the divorce was legally finalized, he made his relationship with actress Adria Arjona officially public on Instagram, posting photographs from a trip to Japan. Arjona is 12 years younger than Momoa. She is a Puerto Rican actress known for her work in Andor, Hitman, and Blink Twice, the last of which was directed by Zoe Kravitz. Arjona has since been photographed walking red carpets at events for Momoa's projects alongside Lola and Nakoa Wolf. By late 2025, Momoa was calling her the love of his life in interviews. The internet had opinions. Fans noticed almost immediately that Arjuna's physical style, her dark hair, her bohemian aesthetic, the way she carries herself, bore a striking resemblance to Lisa Bonet. The comments poured in. He got himself a younger Lisa. He didn't even try to change his type. One person wrote bluntly, "What was the point of breaking up the marriage if you just end up with someone who looks exactly like your ex-wife?" Another, more pointedly, noted that she looked more like his daughter than his girlfriend, a reference to the age dynamic that reversed the situation he had spent 16 years in, where he was the younger partner to Bonet's 12 years senior presence. Momoa, for his part, has publicly framed his post-divorce life as one of liberation and growth. He has suggested that Arjona brings out a calmer, more patient version of himself. Sources close to him have echoed that framing, pointing to his career trajectory. A Minecraft movie became a global box office success in 2025. His Apple TV Plus series, Chief of War, premiered to critical acclaim, as evidence of a man thriving. And yet, the Arjona comparison opened a conversation that Momoa probably didn't anticipate. Because if sources close to him are correct, that he is calmer and more grounded around her, what does that say about the years he spent with Bonet? It suggests quietly but clearly that the dynamic of their marriage, her steadiness, her deep rootedness, her resistance to his restless energy, may have been creating friction that neither of them fully named publicly. The man who gushed about Lisa Bonet in every interview, who credited her with saving him, who described her as a goddess and himself as a degenerate in comparison, apparently needed something she could no longer give him: the freedom to be as loud, as driven, and as relentlessly ambitious as his career was asking him to be. Bonet, by contrast, had reached a place in her life where ambition meant something quieter: healing, presence, authenticity. Those were two people wanting entirely different versions of the same word: freedom. Lisa Bonet has said almost nothing. She has stepped almost entirely away from the Hollywood spotlight. She is occasionally photographed in Los Angeles, living quietly. She has not publicly commented on Momoa's new relationship, his characterization of their split, or anything else related to the divorce. She has focused, by all accounts, on her children and her own healing. She also shares Zoe Kravitz as a daughter, and Zoe, who directed Blink twice, which featured Arjona, and who has maintained a warm relationship with Momoa, appears to have navigated the family transition without public drama. But what Lisa Bonet did do, and this is the part that deserves to be read clearly, was file a document that told the truth. She named October 7th, 2020, as the real end date. She established that the public narrative of their relationship had not been the private reality for well over a year. She confirmed, through legal paperwork, that when they were photographed together at the Aquaman premiere in 2018, when he was tearing up about her in award speeches, when they were being held up as one of Hollywood's last great love stories, the foundation beneath all of that had already begun to crack. The exposé was never a headline. It was a court document. It didn't accuse him of infidelity or cruelty or failure, but it did something perhaps more revealing than any of those accusations could. It established a quiet, official, unambiguous record of when the fantasy ended and when the private truth began. And sometimes that kind of measured, documented honesty is the loudest thing a person can say. What Jason Momoa built his public persona around, the devoted husband, the childhood crush who got his dream girl, the man for whom love was the ultimate adventure, all of that narrative relied on a story that Lisa Bonet's filing gently, precisely, and permanently complicated. The separation date wasn't just a legal detail. It was a revelation about who was telling the truth, who was protecting the fiction, and who finally decided that the fiction had gone on long enough. The woman who once told a magazine she was learning to step into a river of uncertainty had, it turns out, already made it to the other side. She had drawn a line in a legal document and, without a single accusatory word, told the world everything it needed to know. Not about who Jason Momoa is in front of a camera, but about what their marriage actually was when no one was watching. That is what the paperwork exposed. That is what the silence protected. And that is what, once you understand it, makes Lisa Bonet's quiet exit louder than anything he has said since. The world fell in love with their story. Lisa Bonet's paperwork told them when it actually ended. What are your thoughts about what has been revealed? Share with us in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. For more interesting stories like this, be sure to click on the next video that pops up on your screen. You never know what you'll discover next.